A few weeks ago, Sant asked me to tell something or to have a talk about flying in the Alps, but with the background, I thought it would be better Jan would do it, because I started gliding in 1970. I came into the Alps mid-70s with the Forces University Gliding Club, and I was flying in the Alps, but people were not communicative. I had to try out everything alone. They most had standard libelles and standard zeros, and I had a standard libelle from the club, and they only talked to me after they realized that they couldn't shake me off. So after becoming an FI, I aim to prevent the same situation again and again. And more people attended the cross-country theory classes in winter and the practical courses that I then did at the Alpine Gliding School. And then the inevitable happened. The cross-country apprentices outshone the old masters, and Jan is one of the new masters, so we old masters should step back. And Jan will introduce himself a little bit. And we flew together the last time in summer 2019 with me in the K13 and he in the K21. It was the last time that we were together cross-country. So I'll hand over to Jan, and I will get my microphone off for the moment. To everybody, you can ask any question on the chat in between time. I will then go in, and Jan especially likes questions during his presentation. That's a special thing he likes, and then it's more like a discussion that then takes place. And so, Jan, if you take over, that would be nice.
Thank you, Reiner. Thanks for the introduction. I have to add that the last time we flew together, Reiner was flying a K13, I was flying a K21, and I couldn't shake him off. So I think I still have to learn a little bit. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It's a pleasure to talk about what I like doing best. In fact, yes, it'll be about mountain flying, because I don't know about any other flying, and we always joke that we are scared to go into the flatlands. And it'll also be about flying in my K6, because yeah, that's during the past few years, that's definitely the aircraft I've been enjoying most. You should all be able to see my screen with a K6 picture on it. Can you see that? Okay, good. So first, I'd like to give you just a very brief overview about where we are flying. So that's the European Alps. In the east, there's Vienna, capital of Austria. In the west, you can see Geneva. That's about 700 kilometers from Vienna to Geneva. And then the Alps curve down to the south, and that's another approximately 250 kilometers from Geneva to Nizza. So that's really quite a big playground. Let's see if I can. Oops, sorry. I need to go back one picture. I think I clicked too quickly. So we are flying in the eastern part of the Alps. Yeah, can you see my mouse? Yeah, you can. Okay, so here in the eastern half of the northern fringes of the Alps, you see that little lake, that's Chiemsee, and our airfield is just in the first valley, south of Chiemsee. It's really on the northern edge of the Alps. but most of the time we fly into the mountains. We don't fly into the flatlands very much. And usually our playground is approximately the eastern half of the Alpine arc. So usually it's, we have about 250 kilometers of mountains till Vienna, where the mountains end and also the airspace gets difficult. And we have another approximately 250 kilometers to eastern Switzerland, to St. Moritz. So that's our usual playground, approximately 250 kilometers to the east, to the west. Our airfield, that's our airfield. It's home to 3 gliding clubs, plus a commercial gliding school. I'm employed as an instructor at the gliding school, so I enjoy the privilege of flying whenever it's possible to fly. I mostly do the cross-country courses, so it's an extra privilege to be able to fly cross-country whenever it's possible. Apart from the cross-country courses, the gliding school does a lot of basic instruction. Here you can see the winch launch track. The winch is down here on the lower edge of the picture. It's actually an electric winch. Most of our flying is from the winch for basic training, but most cross-country flying is from Heritage. So that's a picture in autumn. We do our basic training on K13s. We have 5, soon 6 K13s. And we do the cross-country courses mainly on K21s, just the advanced cross-country training is on the Geodiscus. As to cross-country flying, before we get to flying the K6, somebody asked how long has our club had the electric winch. I think in the mid-1990s it was built. It was actually designed and built on the airfield, so it's not a commercially available winch. It's not running on batteries, it's running on the electric network. And it proves to be very, very reliable. Nowadays, we do something like 12,000 to 14,000 winch launches a year. I think in Reiner's times, it was a lot more. By that time, it was 20, 25,000 winch launches a year. And yeah, it's got 4 cables. It's extremely reliable. The only disadvantage is we can't turn it around. It's fixed. So we only have one direction for launches. Okay, typical cross-country flight from Unterwossen.
Just a moment, Jan.
Yeah.
Jan, if I may interrupt.
Sure.
It was a major investment, to answer John's question. At that time, it was a major investment, but we already, when we got the electricity to the airfield, we already planned to intersect this cable and have the electric winch there. We did get some subsidies, but we had, well, it was more like a mortgage. We had to pay it back, but we did that within 5 years. We were able to pay back the investments for everything, for the electric cable from the main to the point where the winch is, and for the winch itself, because we built it ourselves, and that saved quite a lot of money. And the winch runway is 1,000 meters, yes. But to answer Bruce's question, you can't reach the early thermals in the mountains from the winch. If you want to go cross country, you have to be away fairly early. Jan will come to that. But the winch, to get to the thermals from the winch, is hardly possible before, let's say, 10:30, 11 local time.
Actually, I must admit, I don't even have a lot of experience with flying cross country from the winch, because if it's a good day, you don't want to take the risk of not getting away from the winch or getting away from the winch late. So really, most of my cross country flying is from the aerotow. Yeah, as a typical cross country flight, I chose a little flight. There's always, on a talk like that, there's always a risk of just showing the 500K plus flights, which are nice to look at, but obviously most of our flights are smaller flights, and the one I've got here is a typical, well, maybe not a beginner's flight, but it's the backbone of our cross-country flying. So that's really just to give you a picture of what we're doing in thermal conditions. That's important to emphasize. And all the flights I'm showing are on my Ka6. That's really because I'm not because I'm so convinced that those flights are so good, but that's the only flights I can comment on. So that's why I take my own flights. So that's a typical little flight of about 200 kilometers. In the north, you can see the Lake Chiemsee, which is really in the flatlands. The northern fringe of the Alps is quite a sudden rise. The flatlands are something around 1,800 feet, 1,600, 1,800 feet. The very first chain of mountains is already around 5,000 feet. So that's quite a sudden jump from the flatlands to the first chain of mountains. Approximately 70 kilometers to the south, you can see the main chain of the Alps, of the Alpine Divide. I marked that with that gray dotted line. Now, the special thing in really all the Eastern Alps is you get big valleys running along the main chain. So the main chain essentially runs from west to east, from Geneva to Vienna. So that's approximately from west to east. And you get these valleys, those big valley systems running parallel to the main chain. So you get big valley systems from west to east, which is nice, of course, because a valley running from west to east means you have a continuous line of slopes facing south, facing to the sun. So you get very nice thermal streets, but that's not streeting that happens by chance. That's streeting that is given by the terrain. So really what you want to do in our area is you want to fly on those valleys. So it's kind of a stupid idea to start on the northern edge of the Alps. Would make more sense to start on an airfield like here, like Zell am See, which is right on those racing tracks. But anyway, that's where we are. So usually a typical flight from Unterwossen is first 50 kilometers, a little bit difficult, work your way into the mountains, onto those big east-western valleys, then run along those valleys, which I did here on a small scale. That is about 50 kilometers here from west to east. And then in the evening, you fly home. Usually our whole concept for flying home is we hope for cloud base to rise enough that we can glide back those 50 kilometers. We don't have much more of a concept for going home, but usually that works out. Yeah, so that's really the basic concept of thermal cross-country flying in our area. In real life, that looks like that. That's from the same flight. We're looking to the east, so you can see that big valley system essentially running from here another 250 kilometers all the way to Vienna, with little gaps in between and little kinks and so on. But essentially, it's the same concept for even for a 500 kilometer flight. And you can see the eagles know that too. They do that for a living, so they should know, but they're flying there as well.
And if I may interrupt,
Sure.
this part is called the leisure walk.
Yeah.
The Pinzgau leisure walk.
Yeah. Sometimes it is a leisure walk. It's quite a leisurely stroll. Yeah. Somebody wrote in the chat, good fields. That is really a big advantage of our part of the Alps. Many of the valleys look like this one. So you have steep slopes with woods all the way down into the valley, but then the valley floor in many valleys is really flat with big fields. So outlanding is comparatively easy. But still, we have an outlanding catalog. We fly by the catalog. Yeah, so that was the introduction to give you a rough picture of our area. I think I'll continue with the wood is good, yeah. I continue with the flying the Ka6. I must say when we bought the Ka6 in 2016, I had never flown a Ka6 before. It's quite a common glider in German clubs, but I never had the opportunity to fly one. So when we bought it, we were 5 people by that time. It was really just a fun project. We thought we'd buy that nice little glider, we'll fly it as an old-timer glider, maybe in the afternoon on our local ridge, you know, from the last Winch launch, just 1.5 hours going up and down the ridge and having fun. And by that time, I did not believe that I would ever go cross-country in a Ka6. I had done most of my cross-country flying in a standard series. And then in the gliding school, I flew mainly K21, sometimes Duodiscus, but I didn't believe you could go cross-country in a wooden glider. I had many beliefs about wooden gliders. And by that time, I didn't know they were beliefs. By that time, I thought that was knowledge. So if you think about what you believe about going cross country in a wooden glider, you might come up with similar things. So, for example, I thought that would require a really, really high cloud pace. So I thought going cross country in a wooden glider with a normal cloud pace, impossible. I thought, if I go cross-country in a wooden glider, I'd outland all the time. I was convinced of that. I was sure, especially in mountain flying, in thermal conditions, you'd rather want to arrive above the crest of the next mountain. And I was sure flying in a wooden glider with a low glide angle, I'd always arrive really low below the crests. Which is not a problem in itself, but arriving far below the crest means the risk of dropping out of the system is higher. So I thought this would become more or less a game of luck. Okay, either you're lucky, you get back up again, or you just land out. So these beliefs are all quite interconnected. And so all in all, I thought a wooden glider just wouldn't take me far. And of course, cross-country flying is partly about the points you get on the OLC or on WeGlide or whatever. But on the other hand, you want to see landscapes and mountains far away. So I thought to sum up my beliefs about wooden gliders, I just thought that the performance would be insufficient for cross-country. And I think many people who, like me, started cross-country flying on a plastic glider, even if it's only a standard series like me, have similar beliefs about flying wooden gliders. So in the end, the Ka6 convinced me that most of those beliefs just didn't hold true. But maybe first, the one thing that I really learned from the first season on the Ka6 was about performance of the glider. I think we tend to talk about performance of a glider mainly in terms of glide angle, and of course the language we use shapes the thinking. And the Ka6 taught me to think differently about that. So I'll try to put that into some numbers. So when we're talking about a glider's performance, we tend to talk about the performance in terms of best L/D, best glide angle. When you discuss at the campfire or at the bar, everybody says, the Ka26, that's just a 1 in 30 glider, or 1 in 29 glider. I've got a Ka6cr, so apparently that's at a best L/D of 1 in 29. K21 would be at 33 or so. My standard series probably at something like 36. Now that's the figure we usually use to talk about the performance of a glider. But does it make sense? I mean, best L/D means, translated into MacCready settings, best L/D means a MacCready setting of 0. So when would you fly at a MacCready setting of 0? Only if you expect your next lift to be 0. Okay, so that's hopeless. If you have no hope to find any lift, then you might be operating your glider at best L/D. And in my opinion, it just makes no sense to use that number to compare different gliders. It would be much nicer to compare gliders at a higher MacCready setting. So, for example, you could take MacCready 3 knots, 1.5 meters per second. That's really just arbitrary. You could use 2 knots or 4 knots, whatever suits the area you're flying in. So I just took 3 knots as an average, normal, good conditions value. So if we look at the speed to fly for those 3 gliders at a MacCready setting of 3, it's approximately 60 knots for the Ka6, approximately 70 knots for the K21, and approximately 75 for the standard series. So that's where the real performance difference is. It's just slower, and in the same weather conditions, you'll just go slower. The interesting bit is, if we now look at the L/D these gliders achieve at that speed at MacCready 3, we arrive at a much more comparable number. So I like to call that operational L/D as opposed to the best L/D, because that's the L/D you actually operate your glider at. So the standard series would be at 28 at 75 knots. That sounds not quite as good as 36, but that's what you usually operate a standard series at. Now the K21, what would you guess? it's 28 too. So the performance difference between a K21 and a standard series vanishes in terms of glide angle. It's just a speed difference. And the Ka6 is a 24. So if we compare those gliders at the speeds we actually operate them at, the differences are not as big. Okay, so I'm not trying to talk a Ka6 to be as good as any plastic glider, certainly not. But I'm trying to free myself from that thinking in best LOVDs, because we just don't operate our gliders at best LOVD. Hopefully not. We operate them at high speed, and in fact, the differences are not that big at those speeds. That seems maybe a bit theoretical, but in practice, I found that to be confirmed. In fact, it was quite surprising when I started to go cross country in the Ka6 that it didn't seem to be that much worse in terms of glide angle than the standard series or than the K21 I was used to, just slower. So I was sliding down more or less the same slope, just slower. So yeah, so in the second season with the Ka6, I started to try further and further distances. That's my first 300-kilometer flight on a Ka6 in 2017. That's actually something I found when I prepared for that talk. There were so many firsts in the Ka6. Say, first 300K in the Ka6. You can see it's still the same schematic. It's still from Unterwossen. Here's Lake Chiemsee, from Unterwossen into the mountains, and then run along those east-western valleys and back again. So that was a 300K out and return. And on those flights, I saw that the glide angle just didn't seem to be that much of a problem. Paul asks whether the climb rate of the Ka6 overcomes the LOVD. Well, actually, that's something I thought when I started flying on the Ka6. I thought the climb rate must be significantly better. Actually, in practice, it's not. It's maybe 10% better, but on a good day, the difference is not really that big. On a really, really bad day, sometimes it can be an advantage to be able to climb away in a really weak thermal or in a really narrow thermal or on a ridge that only works on a really, really short portion of the ridge. So you have to turn all the time, fly very short figure eights. Then I sometimes get an advantage. But in normal conditions, I would say I'm not climbing significantly better than all the plastic stuff. Sometimes, yes, if there's a narrow core in a thermal, but then I have to accept more thermals, whereas the plastic people can, if they dare to, can be a bit more picky with their thermals. So, no, in fact, I'm not climbing much better. So my average speed is, of course, a lot lower than plastic gliders. But I don't run into a problem with too low a glide angle. at least not into a massive problem. Let's see. So I'm a bit of a statistics person, but I guarantee you that's the last diagram. After the first 2 full seasons, that was 2017 and 2018, I had a couple of longer flights, and I did a bit of statistics to find out what L over Ds do I actually achieve over ground, not relative to the air, but over ground. So in this diagram, you have those little blue dots. Each blue dot is 1 flying hour. Altogether, that's 60 hours. So it's 60 blue dots, and they come from 9 different flights. They were all thermal flights, and they were all good flights. They were the 9 best thermal flights I had by that time. So they are all above 400 kilometers. Now, the interesting bit is on the x-axis here, you have the glide ratio over ground, glide ratio actually achieved. So the glider itself should be able to do 30 or 29. So anything, I put a red line here. Anything to the right of that red line is better than the glider actually should be able to fly. So obviously that is all using some sort of lifting line. It's not tailwind, because usually on the good thermal days we don't get a lot of wind in the mountains. Oh, let's turn it around. A day with a lot of wind wouldn't be a good thermal day, and that's only thermal flights. So most of the time you actually operate the glider on some sort of lifting line, and the glide ratio is way better than what you'd expect from the Polar. In fact, the average glide ratio of those 60 hours was 40, which is not bad for a 1 in 29 glider. On the other axis, you can see the average cross-country speed achieved, average for that hour. So every dot, say this dot here is 70 is an hour in which I covered 70 kilometers. That's quite a large range. So my feeling is you get, on a good day, you get 60 kilometers per hour. Normally, 70 is good. For 80, you have to work really, really hard. Most of my flights are around 60. The average of all Ka6 flights, I saw that in WeGlide the other day, is exactly 50. So it is slow. It is really slow. But maybe being that slow means that it's easier to find a lifting line. So those high glide ratios, 40, 50, they're just possible along lifting lines. So that looks something like that. That's obviously a really good day and a really good lifting line. And it's very clear where the good energy line is here along the peaks of the mountains. My impression is being that slow makes it a lot easier to follow the lifting line. You just get more time. If you hit lift at 60 knots, you have much more time to react than hitting lift at 100 knots. Plus, it's less of an investment to do a, say, 30-degree turn to follow the lifting line at 50, 60 knots. Whereas at 100 knots, it's questionable whether you can follow those little bends in the lifting line. And in fact, that's very rewarding when you fly that 1 in 29 glide, and in the evening you get an average over the whole flight of 1 in 40, and you get maybe an hour or two with 1 in 60. that feels really good, I must say. And of course, it gives you a very, very, very good feedback about your decisions. So that's also something something I like a lot about flying those low performance gliders. The feedback about the quality of decisions is very direct, and that's not only on the negative side. When I say, oh, I like the good feedback, people always say, yes, if you make one mistake, you're down in the field. No, I'm not. But it's actually the good feedback is also on the positive side. If I find a lifting line like that on this picture, it's just nice to see the 1 in 50 or 1 in 60 glide on the well, whatever, XC Soar or CO Mobile or whatever. So that's definitely part of the fun. Good. Okay, so with all those lifting lines, that's all very well, you might say. But what about if I have to glide through still air, which happens? And I guess in the flatlands this happens more often, but in the mountains it definitely happens when we have to cross a valley. So here I had to well, relearn another, or I had to dump another of my beliefs, because for many years I was very, very convinced that the performance difference between a wooden glider and a plastic glider would be greater in the mountains. In fact, I read that in the famous book by Jochen von Kalkreuth. Actually, I don't know if it's translated into English, but it's the standard book about mountain flying. And it's from the 1970s, but it's still the standard book about mountain flying. And the author, Jochen von Kalkreuth, says, well, you see, in the flatlands, you have the performance difference in terms of the glide angle. So here, I rather exaggerated that performance difference. I took a Ka6 at 1 in 25 here, and some plastic glider, probably a discus or something, at 1 in 40. So that's sand on this discus. So in the flatlands, it's clearly a performance difference because the wooden glider will arrive slightly lower in the next lift and in the next cloud, and thus will have to climb more. But that is only a percentage difference. Now, Jochen von Kalkreuth argues that in the mountains, it is not only a percentage difference, it is a principal difference, because he says in the mountains, the difference will be that I should switch. In the mountains, the difference will be not only that percentage difference, but additionally, the lower performance glider, the wooden glider, will pay an additional penalty because it will arrive below the crest. And below the crest, it will climb at a lower climb rate, maybe having to do figure eights. So that's the logic, which I believed for many years. I even taught that in my cross-country courses. So I was totally convinced that this must be true. But when I started flying the Ka6, sorry, it says the belief is that the wood plastic performance gap is larger in mountains. So probably the situation Jochen von Kalkreuth had in mind was something like that, okay? So it's quite far to the next mountain. We're not that high anymore and probably will arrive below the crest, which is not a problem, especially not on a steep mountain like that, but probably will arrive below. The thing is, in practice, it just didn't seem to occur that often. Actually, I had to search for that photo for quite a long time. So I tried to put numbers to that. I measured a couple of typical valley crossings in our area. Quite to my surprise, I found that the typical valley crossings are on the order of 10 kilometers. Which is not that far. So we get, depending on how high both gliders start, we get a green altitude band here. If both gliders start from that green altitude band, they will both arrive above the crest. Okay, the wooden glider hit just about above the crest, the plastic glider higher, but they will both arrive above the crest. So the green altitude band is the same situation as in the flatlands. There is a percentage performance difference, but there's no principal difference, and there's no additional penalty for the wooden glider to be paid. If they both start lower, they will both arrive below the crest. So again, it's just a percentage difference. You could even argue that the wooden glider will climb slightly better in figure eights close to the mountain face, but we can leave that aside. From that red altitude band here, they will both arrive below the crest, so it will again be similar situation for both. So only in between, that's this little tiny yellow altitude band here in between. Only if they start from here, only then will the wooden glider arrive below, but the plastic glider above. Okay, so that's the situation which I thought would be the standard problem. In fact, if you put the numbers in, you see it just doesn't happen very often. So here's all three again. From the red altitude band, both below the crest, both have the same problem. Slight advantage for the wooden glider maybe. From the green altitude band, both arrive below the above the crest or above the peak. Both have no problems, and only from the yellow altitude band does this performance difference actually translate into an additional penalty for the wooden glider. So that belief that the wood plastic performance gap would be larger in mountains is true, but experience shows it is true, but it just doesn't occur very often. So it's true but rare, and that was very surprising to me. And of course, it's got to do with those fairly short valley crossings. Okay. I guess in the flatlands, this could be more of a problem if you have to cross a 20-mile blue hole from low cloud base. Okay, then the difference is a lot bigger. But in the mountains, it just doesn't seem to occur very often. Big surprise to me. Took me 2 seasons on the Ka6 to understand this. Once you see it, it seems simple. But flights like that kind of seem to prove that. That's the standard schematic for a triangle from Unterwossen. So we start again at the northern edge of the Alps, the northern fringes of the Alps in Unterwossen. But this time we don't just go to those west-eastern long valleys on the northern side of the Alps. We actually have to cross the main divide for a triangle. So usually the first leg is really slow because you have to cross the main divide, or the Alpine divide. Then for the second leg, you can make use of a very similar system of east-west valleys on the southern side. So usually you try to get the second leg as long as possible because it runs along those long east-west valleys. And then for the third leg, you have to cross the main divide again. And for the flight home, same concept as always. Let's hope for cloud base to be high enough to allow the last 50K, 60K to be a final glide, which usually works out. Yeah, so even for crossing the main divide, it seems to hold true that either it's not possible at all for no gliders, or it's possible for everybody. The days which allow the plastic gliders to cross, whereas I bounce back, these days are really rare.
Yeah, any question?
Yeah.
There's a question on this chat.
Ah, right. ATC issues. Technically, yes. Technically, you would have to have a flight plan for crossing international boundaries, even within Europe. However, there are mutual agreements of the member states, one member state with the next, and they all have mutual agreements that they do not require a flight plan for crossing the state boundaries. So, for example, this flight can be done without a flight plan, without a transponder, and without any contact to any ATC unit. So, for the time being, we are still airspace paradise over here. The maximum altitudes are large parts of Austria are flight level 125. Over the main chain, it's 14,500 feet. Further in the west, it's 15,500. And Italy is generally level 195. However, Italy has a lot of funny military training areas, which are usually not active. But of course, you should read the NOTAMs. But for the time being, flight like that is still possible without transponder. And on a normal thermal day, you can go to cloud base without needing any clearance. With a few exceptions, which we circumnavigate, of course. But yeah, it's still paradise, ATC-wise. For wave flying, it gets more and more difficult. Wave flying gets, it's without with a transponder, it's no problem, but wave flying without a transponder gets more and more difficult. Often we just get level 160, sometimes only 145 without a transponder. So sooner or later, I will have to double the value of my Ka6 by installing a transponder. Oh, that's a picture from that flight. That's from the second leg, and that's one of the most beautiful parts of those triangle flights. These are the Dolomites in northern Italy, and back there, that's the Trecime. That's probably one of the mountains of which the most photographs are being taken. And in fact, I do quite a lot of, if I don't have to fly a triangle, I love to do sightseeing flights into the Dolomites, because that looks like that, and that's much more nicer than just passing by on the fast leg of a triangle. That's the Trecime again, close up. Yeah. So now I have to remember what I wanted to say with this photo. Oh yeah, I do remember. Okay. So what are we doing here in Scotland? I asked. You guys are wave flying. We are envious about your waves. That's why I only took thermal flights here. So this picture is that's to illustrate a big problem from our airfield. So far, we've flown to the east along those east-western valleys. We've flown to the south, flying a triangle. But of course, we would also like to go to the west. That's a bit of a problem, because when we want to go to the west, only about 20 kilometers west of us, we have to cross a big valley. That's the Inn Valley. So the river down here is called Inn, I-N-N, like a pub, like an inn. And that can be something of a problem. Now, why am I talking about that? I think many airfields have a similar situation, that you get reasonable, nice thermals around the airfield, but maybe a bit late, maybe a bit low, and somewhere not too far away, thermals are regularly starting earlier, reaching a higher cloud base. So I think that's an issue which many airfields have. So to illustrate that, I have a little map. So that's really the same situation. On the right of the picture, you see Unterwossen here. That's our airfield. We want to go west, but after about 20 kilometers, you see here the Inn River with its big valley. Now, the valley itself would not be that much of a problem, but I think it pays off to think in terms of air masses, different air masses, and to understand where the divide between one air mass and the other is. And experience shows that, well, obviously, usually it's the same, the divide between one air mass and the other is the same as the watershed. So it usually runs along the crests of the mountains. So we have one divide here along those mountains. Actually crossing that valley, here's a little pass down in the valley, and then running along the next mountains. And the other air mass division is here. So in fact, that valley is not only the river valley itself. In terms of air mass, it's a lot wider. Days are different. Sometimes you don't even notice this this valley, but especially in summer and on hot days, it's really three completely different air masses. So there's one here in the Unterwossen area. It's reasonably good there, but it starts a little late, and cloud base is comparatively, it's perhaps not fair to call the cloud base low, but it's comparatively a little lower. And in the west, very often we get a very good air mass, which starts really early with a significantly higher cloud base. Well,
you can, Jan, can I
yeah.
interrupt? You can, this is also shown. You see there is a symbol. Can you go to Gaitau with your mouse? You see this airfield is a pure winch airfield. And I think the first 1,000 K in the Northern Alps were flown from the winch from there, because they can start really early. Okay, I'm off.
Yeah, and they have a single drum winch. They can only launch in one direction. I think they only have 800 meters of cable. It's a tiny little airfield. They have to rig their gliders every day because they don't have a real hangar, but still they flew the first 1,000 K. So it's a good starting point. So quite often you get the first cumulus clouds here and here and here. So that's where you want to go. In between, the air mass in the in-river often is just very, very stable. And it's not only in the actual river valley, but really all the way to those air mass divides. Yeah, so that is a bit of a problem. The distance is not that far, it's 30 kilometers, but still, it's a bit difficult.
Yeah, question.
Yeah.
In the chat.
Convergences. Actually, not a lot of convergence flying. At least not in our part of the Alps. I'm trying to come up with a reason why we don't get long convergence lines. Probably the air masses along the parallel to the Alps are either too different. Well, actually,
normally a convergence line runs across the Alps from north to south and moves eastward. So you can't use the advantage of the long valleys.
Yeah.
So it's not really a possibility to go there. It doesn't make any sense.
I have had really nice convergence lines on the southern side of the Alps. So, for example, through the Dolomites, when the moist air from the Italian flatlands creeps up into the Dolomites, then you get a very, very pronounced convergence line, which runs more or less east to west through the Dolomites. I have had one along the I think Carnian Alps, that's east of the Dolomites. That's basically the border between Austria and northern Italy, and then even further to the east between Austria and Slovenia. I have had convergence lines, but it is not as common as, for example, in New Zealand or even in South Africa. I had much more convergence than back home. Do you not see the stable valleys kicking off in the evening as the anabatic flow starts to back off? Depends a lot on the size of the valley. So, for example, this valley here, the In Valley, that has its stability problem for two reasons. In the morning, it has a stability problem because it's still katabatic flow, the flow coming down from the mountains, the cold air coming down from the mountains, and then flowing out of the valley. So in the morning, I mean, here on this picture, we're talking about the morning situation. Morning being anything between 10 o'clock and 12, half past 12. So in the morning, it's still cold air flowing out of the valley. So that cold air is stable because it had all night to reorganize itself in a stable manner. It flows out of the valley during the night, but the valley is that big and that long that that reservoir of cold air keeps flowing out of the valley till at least 11, half past 11, maybe even 12 o'clock. So that's stable air from the night. Then things reverse, and during the afternoon, those valleys start to develop an anabatic flow, a valley wind system flowing into the mountains from the flatlands. Usually thermals in the flatlands are not that good. Thermals in the mountains are better. So the thermals in the mountains will start to draw air into the mountains. But that air that gets drawn into the mountains can be quite stable as well, especially in summer when the flatlands are just hot. So that is mainly a problem for the valley entrances, like here. So stable air gets drawn into the mountains. An additional problem is that we sit on the northern fringe of the Alps, which is a pretty stupid position to build an airfield or practice gliding, because it means all the valley wind systems come in from the north, yet the sun is in the south, like everywhere on the northern hemisphere. So you get the valley wind system from the north and the sun from the south, and that can kill south-facing slopes. For example, no, it's covered, but for example, here's a famous slope, the one here, the one you can see here between the green box and the red box. This slope seems to be facing south, but in the afternoon, the valley wind just flows over this slope and just kills it. It's just a lee slope. And the Austrians are clever people. The Austrians built an airfield down here, which sells aerotones at the usual prices. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. I think real evening thermals are more something for valleys further in the mountains. We don't get that at the fringe of the mountains, but closer to the main divide, you get late in the evening thermals from the valley floors. Okay, so we have this problem. We've got the good late and low thermals around our airfield. We have the big stable valley in between, and we have those very good early high thermals in the west where we actually want to go. So what can we do? Don't even try. That seems to be a very popular choice, judging by what people at our airfield do. There's so many people who just don't try, which is a pity, because some of them are really good cross-country pilots, and they never go to the west because they say, oh no, I have to cross the big valley and it's too far anyway, and if I don't make it, that's really a pity. Next option, you can wait. You can start here, linger around in the thermals around the airfield, and then hope for cloud base here in the yellow air mass to rise high enough so that you can then cross the valley. That is a pretty stupid choice, because actually it's what I did on the last photo I showed. But it's a pretty stupid choice, because it means you're wasting one of the big advantages that green MS here in the West has, the early start. Okay, if I linger around my home airfield and wait for cloud base to go high enough to cross, then the early start is wasted. So waiting, it works, but it's not clever. Next thing, you can buy a better glider. But well, we saw before that glide ratio gives you a little gradual advantage, but still buy a better glider and then still wait around here till your better glider takes you over to the good thermals. It's not much more clever than the other solution. What else can we do? Oh, we can buy a self-launcher. Many people do that these days. You can buy a self-launcher, switch on your motor, and just go where the good thermals are. In fact, I see quite a lot of people who learn a lot and whose cross-country performance increases a lot once they have an engine, and that's largely because they start actually trying the things they have always known to work. They just haven't dared to do it. So buying a self-launcher probably solves the problem. It's just expensive. But 250,000 euros, buy an Arcus M, problem solved. There is one other option, at least one other option which I can imagine, and that looks like that. You have this hook at the front end of your glider. Just tie a tow plane to your glider. Now, people always say, oh my God, that's expensive.
Compare it to the price of a self-launcher.
Yeah. Remember, we just saved 250,000 euros by not buying an Arcus M. Okay. So it is, yes, in a way it's expensive, but I can afford many, many long arrow tows for the Arcus M I did not buy. I mean, I couldn't have bought an Arcus M, but a long arrow tow every now and then is much more affordable. So that's something I'd really like to encourage you to do. And this picture here, you can see that actually that is an arrow tow over the in valley. That's exactly the situation we were just looking at. So down here we have the in valley. We're looking to the west. The arrow tow goes to the west, and here you can see the first clouds, really high, really nice. Okay. And the alternative, same moment, same picture into the other direction. That would have been the alternative. There's just nothing back there. Okay. Probably I shouldn't admit that, but that's the pictures from the WhatsApp chat with the Tuggy. Yeah, I'd really like to encourage you to do long arrow tows whenever you have an idea. Probably the idea was not stupid in the first place, so usually it works, usually it pays off. Very often.
If I could interject there, Jan, I think that is so important, you know, and particularly for an airfield like Portmoak, and we've discussed that innumerable times on, you know, on talks here. But you know, the good lift starts early, either on the Ochils or even further, you know, into you know, the Grampians and so on. And taking a long aero tow, yeah, as long as the forecast means that you can get back, i.e., you know, Portmoak is you know, starts later, I mean, obviously, you've got to be careful about the sea air, which again is similar to your valley and all the rest of it, right? But an aero tow takes you to where the lift is, and I couldn't agree more. And I think it not only applies, as I've said, at your site, but also applies to us. I'll mute there.
Bribing the poor pilot at the back of the grid is really an issue. However, at least in our case, quite often if I do that long tow, the tow plane is back before the next pilot actually wants to launch, because the difference in the thermals in the west start that much earlier that my complete tow, including the flight, the flight back home for the tow plane, is finished before the second pilot actually even wants to launch. So I've not yet have to bribe the poor pilot at the back of the grid. Yeah. But it could be an issue if more pilots start to do that. It might be an issue, yes.
If I may interject, Jan.
Yeah, sure, anytime.
Yeah, Unterwossen can, as I wrote in the chat, can muster up to 5 tugs, but normally one uses 2 on a normal day. And so the first tow for the western, or even the first 2, can go before the area starts to build up thermals. So it's not an issue. So if there is a really, really good day, they can muster up to 5 tugs. So that would be another day.
Yeah. And also, it's quite surprising that the time is not that much more than you would expect. But for 2 reasons. One reason is on a normal aero tow with releasing more or less above the field, you fly a lot of unused distance. You do circles and fly circuit and whatever. If you unwrap all that distance flown, you have to fly that distance anyway until you reach the required release altitude. So unwrapping that distance into a straight line means the actual time on the tow rope is not that much longer. A couple of minutes longer, maybe 2-3 minutes longer. And the main difference is the longer flight back for the tow plane. So at our airfield, normal tug is 13, 14, sometimes 15 minutes. The long tow over the in-valley is usually not more than 20 minutes. So we're going from 13, 14, 15 to maximum 20 minutes. So that's approximately one and a half tows. So it's not that bad. Usually you can release quite a long way before you actually reach the first cloud. So that's the same flight in a three-dimensional view. So that was my release point, which was really in the middle of the valley. Then I had a 10-kilometer glide to the first, some lift in between, and approximately 10 or 12 kilometers glide to the first cloud. I think this can also have a big psychological advantage, provided there's a good landing opportunity under that cloud. For example, we have the airfield Reiner just mentioned, Gaitau, which is just in the next valley. So provided you have a good landing opportunity in the vicinity of that first cloud, I think it's helpful to burn your boats. Because from here, you could be gliding back. But releasing here and gliding here, it makes no sense to glide back. If you can't glide back, you suddenly have a lot of time to search for the first thermal. If gliding back is no option anyway, you don't carry the extra task of deciding when to turn back, when to go back with you. So I rather like burning my boats, provided, of course, I have a first class easy landing option, which I have here because there's an airfield.
And there's another question a little further back. John Thomas asks, you get nervous when you have to cross the Inn Valley on the way home and there's no evening thermals ahead?
Oh yes, I do get nervous. I do get really nervous. However, there is one. Actually, this picture is quite. We can more or less show that on this picture. It would be a real problem, and in fact, I must admit that the final glide is, of course, a difference between wood and plastic, because on final glide, usually we take a last thermal on the main divide, or on the main chain of the Alps, or at least very close to it, and then it's a long glide through completely still air, because thermals last longest on the highest mountains on the main chain, and then if you take a late thermal there, all the final glide is through completely still air. Usually no problem for the plastic gliders, but for the wooden gliders it can be marginal. And luckily, the Inn Valley makes one very reliable backup lift. There are no thermals anymore, no evening thermals, no normal thermals over the mountains, but yeah, I think I can show that on this picture here. The Inn Valley produces a very strong valley wind system, which during the afternoon is powered by the strong thermals further up the valley, quite far up the valley, really, 100 kilometers up the valley. So you have an enormous mass of air moving in the valley. This enormous mass of air has enormous inertia. So this valley wind system keeps running, even after the thermals have died, because it's just so much mass. I've been studying in Innsbruck, in the Inn Valley, there you often still have the valley wind system running into the valley by midnight. So the valley wind system is still running, no thermals, but there's wind, which is not of a lot of, which doesn't really help as long as it's going parallel through the valley. But here we have a bend in the valley. So this part of the valley is more or less north-south, and approximately here in front of that mountain here, it turns to the west. So the valley wind system comes, I hope you can see my mouse, the valley wind system comes in from here, from the north, and hits this mountain face here, which is a north face, but it's facing the valley wind system. And that is a very reliable source of lift. It's just a local ridge lift, maybe 2-3 kilometers long, but it's just in the right distance from our home airfield. That's one advantage. And the other advantage is a valley wind system is strongest low down. So you can arrive on this north face in the evening as low as you dare.
Yeah.
Probably you could start at 500 feet above the valley floor and you'd still climb away.
Yeah. It goes up, and it goes up to definitely final glide for a Ka6 or a Ka8.
Yeah. If it works and if you can go, it doesn't go over the crest, because for once it's just ridge lift, so it has no reason to go much over the crest. and the valley wind system is strongest low down, and at crest height it's 0. But from crest height, it's just easy final glide back home. So that's a very lucky situation. Yeah. Good, but that's a special thing here. Good. Okay, so yeah, and the tuggy only has to fly back from here. So yeah, I really like to encourage you to do long arrow tows. The tuggies are happy, the Trevor is happy, and you don't need to buy a self-launcher. That was actually the flight from that long arrow tow. So same schematic, really. You see Unterwossen here, like Chiemsee, and that was a long flight to the west. That was actually.
You could just show the ridge that we use. At the end.
Yeah, right. That's here. So the northern flight here is the flight out, and the southern track is the flight back. And now you can see that I'm actually using here the northern face of that mountain. I hope you can see that, and it's a bit tiny. The map is a bit tiny here. So the valley wind comes in here from the flatlands, hits the north face of this mountain, and yeah, and also on this flight it was essential to go home. Yeah, that was actually the furthest, longest out and return flight. I turned around at 275 kilometers out, which was so total distance was 550, 560, and the turn point was 275 or 277 out, which is really scary because it's so far from home. But I love the west. The mountains up there are beautiful. And the mountains in Switzerland are just bigger than back home. That was on the way back, so I had to go around a thunderstorm there. It's just beautiful mountains up there. So that's that is a mixture between kilometers for the online contest and sightseeing in the west. Yeah, so currently I believe that the limit for an out and return in thermals for the Ka6 is 600 kilometers. The furthest was 550 or 560, so I think 600 is a limit. 300 out and 300 back should be possible. Well, that's a belief too. Maybe in 2 years' time I say that was a belief. The Ka6 has proved me wrong. But in the moment, that's my limit. Now, one last thing I'd like to encourage you to do is what can you do to reach goals that are further away than your current limit? Okay, so I mean, for me in the moment, the out and return limit is 600 kilometers. It might be something else, but it's of course cool to reach a goal that's further away. So for once you can practice a lot. Well, that's unpopular and takes a lot of time. But it's very rewarding. You could buy a better glider, which in this case, I must admit, does help. But since we just spent all that money on those long arrow tows, we can't buy a better glider anymore. So what else can we do? We can fly longer. That's an old saying. It's a lot easier to fly 10% longer than 10% faster. So fly longer flights. There's an obvious limit to that, which is sunset. So what else can we do? Well, there's one more option, and that looks like, now my computer gets slow, that looks like that. Pack all your stuff and go 2 days. 1 day to go there, 1 day to fly back. That all fits into a Ka6. It's got the best baggage compartment of any glider, which is not a 2-seater. So it's, and it was not even really cramped. It could be, I think it could fit in even more. And I must say that of all cross-country flights I've done, the most rewarding ones were not those with the most kilometers on the OLC, but the one-way flights. That's something really special, and it enables us to reach a goal beyond our current out and return limit. So, for example, this year I had a really nice flight to the Wasserkuppe. Wasserkuppe is the mountain, or rather hill, where gliding started in the 1920s. You might have seen that monument on the Wasserkuppe. I always wanted to go there, or to fly there, because I actually had my first solo on the Wasserkuppe in 1998. The Ka6 had its first flight on the Wasserkuppe in 1964, so it was a special thing to fly there. Sand asked if a tent is included. No, I took a hotel room. But a tent would have fitted in, yes. So Wasserkuppe is 350 kilometers from Unterwossen, but the airspaces of Munich are really are really in the way. So with flying around the airspace, it's almost exactly 400 kilometers. So no chance for an out and return, impossible. But one way, it's just 400 kilometers. The same applies to any current personal limit. Okay, so if any attractive goal seems to be too far for an out and return flight, consider flying there, landing there, and trying to come back the next day. It is something really special, even if the actual distance is not that far. That flight was I think it was one of my most difficult flights, because first it wasn't the flat.
It's flat land.
Yeah, it was flat land. That is so scary. There's nothing to help you with your decisions. That was, flatlands are scary anyway. Then there was wind from the northeast, so all the Ventuses and Arcuses were running from southwest to northeast here along the Alps, along the not Alps, Swabian Alp. So all the plastic stuff was running across my track, which makes you consider if it's maybe stupid to go at right angles to the racing tracks and at right angles to all the cloud streets. All the cloud streets were running across my track like that. But so the flight was difficult. The flight was not even much fun. But in the evening, that's on the Wasserkuppe. It's difficult to describe the feeling. The flight was difficult. The landing was just normal, like any landing. That's all normal. That's normal cross-country flying. And then you open the canopy and you step out, and then you're actually there. That is incredible. You're actually standing on the ground there. It's yeah, very special feeling. And it doesn't matter how far away that is. I think the feeling would be just the same if you go to your neighbor airfield. You're actually there. You have gone somewhere. You've traveled to another place with your glider, and that's yeah, one of the best things I've ever done in gliding, really. So yeah, there was Wasserkuppe. Next day I flew back the other way. So the flight to the Wasserkuppe was west, on the western side of Munich. And the next day, weather conditions looked like I suggested to go around the eastern side, which worked out well. But I was so glad to see the mountains after all that flatland flying. That was enough of flatland flying for the season. So that's on final glide. You can see the Chiemsee, the lake Chiemsee here, and here's Unterwossen, that valley. So that was final glide. Yeah, in 2018, I had a similar flight. I visited friends in Switzerland. So let's go west again, with a long arrow tow again, crossing the Inn Valley with an arrow tow. Then I almost landed out after 30 kilometers. But then the rest of the flight was just a dream, really. And I went to Saanen. It's not marked here in the map. Saanen is a former military airfield in Switzerland. Normally, there's no gliding, but every year in summer, for 6 weeks or for 8 weeks, a gliding club from Bern goes there, and they spend their holidays there, and they bring their gliders, they bring their tow planes, and they set up a complete gliding operation there. And I had friends there, so I called them and asked if I can visit them, and it worked out. I had to overshoot a little bit because I wanted to see the Lake of Geneva, which is here on the western edge of the picture, and then flew back.
Yeah, and can I just interject, because you have the map?
Yeah.
We did with 2 people. We did a similar flight out, and the next day back, we went to where Jan chose Calcinate the best with his Varese from Unterwossen, and the next day we went back and had a stop in Bolzano, which is a little further to the right.
Yep.
Yeah. So we were not able to do it in 2 days, but in 3 days.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter, does it? Even if it's just a shorter leg, you always meet nice people, and you see beautiful landscapes, which you would not reach on an out and return or on a triangle. And on this flight to Saanen, that was probably one of the most beautiful flights I've had. That's the Aletsch Glacier really in the heart of Switzerland. Everything worked out fine. Cloud base was high enough. The Swiss have an airspace limit to level 130. And at 5:05 in the afternoon, the military stops. The Swiss are very punctual people, and they built good watches. So 5:05 in the afternoon, the military goes home, and then the airspace limit goes up from 130 to 160. And that was just when I arrived here, being the Aletsch Glacier. military was finished, so I could fly right over the Alps Glacier, which made it, yeah, one of the most memorable and most beautiful flights in the Ka6. And I thought a lot about the guy who bought that Ka6 as a new glider in 1964, because I thought, okay, what was his dream in this glider, and what was he dreaming of when he ordered it, and during the 2 years he had to wait for it between ordering it and taking delivery, and what did he fly with it? Yeah. So I hope he'd be happy to see his glider fly over the Alps Glacier 54 years later. Yeah, next day was the flight back, pretty much the same route, just with a couple of really vicious thunderstorms in my back, which made me really fast. But it all worked out. Yeah, and that's back home after that flight. That's our airfield back home in Unterwossen. That's our ridge. Yeah, and that's also a very special feeling to make it back home. But it's not important. It's special, but it's not important, even if you don't make it all the way back home. Try that. Go fly and go fly somewhere else. It's great fun, and it allows you to go really, really to far away places, even in those low performance gliders. Yeah, so I think that's about it. I hope you have some questions, some comments, some extra things you would like to know. Feel free to ask.
I must admit, Jan, I've been sort of sitting listening to that the last 15 minutes, and I just can't help smiling because I just think that's just so fantastic, and I just couldn't stop smiling that last 15 minutes. I just think it's just brilliant. I do.
Well, I think thank you very much, Jan. That was
Welcome.
very nice. And I think you should come over here so that we have the questions in person at some point. When you can make it, just come over here.
Yeah, I'd love to. Actually, today I talked to my girlfriend and said we need to go to Scotland. Yeah. I sort of left out on the wave flying bit because I thought I can't tell you anything about wave flying, you guys. So that's something we could do in real life in Scotland.
Is there any final questions at all?
The 800-kilometer flight within wave, wasn't it?
Well, it was a wind day, but it was almost completely on the ridges. So I think it makes sense in our area to distinguish not only in thermal days and wave days, but actually to distinguish thermal, wind day, which is mainly wave, and wind day, which is mainly on the ridge. And the 800-kilometer flight was almost entirely on the ridge, with a rather unstable air mass. So the unstable air mass prevented waves, but it made the ridges work really well, and there would have been thermals to bridge the gaps in the ridges. Yeah, so those long west-east valleys are not only good thermal routes, not not only good thermal energy lines, but of course, when the wind comes from the south, you also get a nice ridge line.
Paul has another question with the
prevailing winds and ridge lift potential. Okay, so I see if I can go back to no, I'll just answer that like that. For good ridge lift, it's really only southerly wind, because the long ridge lines are running east-west. So that would, or the long valleys run east-west. So that would allow good ridge lift both with southerly winds and with northerly winds. However, northerly wind on the northern side of the Alps, on the northern side of the main divide, usually means very moist conditions. So as long as you're north of the Alpine divide, it's really only southerly wind, because with a southerly wind, you're on the lee side of the Alpine divide, so that makes the air mass dry. And then on the upwind side of the smaller ridges, you can fly on the ridge. Same with a northerly wind. You pack your glider, drive through the tunnel to the southern side of the main divide. Northerly wind on the southern side of the Alpine divide. You're in the lee of the Alpine divide. The air gets dry, and then you fly on the north-facing smaller ridges on the southern side. So north wind, southern side of the Alps. South wind, northern side of the Alps. And the really big flights are mostly on the ridge. However, in the last 5 years or so, people start to combine wave and ridge. So there have been, last year in May, 2 Austrians have flown 1,800 kilometers each, two different gliders on the same day. And those 1,800 kilometer flights were mainly on the ridge with maybe 20-30% wave. And my 800 kilometer flight on the Ka6 was 95% ridge and 5% wave. Also, in theory, 1,000 might be possible, but well.
One still has to have dreams.
Yeah, that's for a magic day to come. If everything falls into place and everything is perfect, in theory, it's possible. And I need 14 hours, and then with a 14-hour day, no mistakes, no thunderstorms. Sometimes with the southerly wind, we get thunderstorms hopping over the Alpine divide. In theory, they should dissolve in the lee, and the downdraft in the lee should just drive them away. But sometimes they make it over the Alpine divide, and that can be quite a problem. That was a problem on the 800 kilometer flight. Two of the waypoints were electrically induced by lightning in front of me.
Oh, thank you very much, Jan. That was brilliant.
Welcome.
And I think it was the right thing to hand over to you, because you can tell more than I could have done.
Oh, we'll continue that in real life at your bar in your clubhouse.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Jan.
Okay.
That was excellent. And Reiner.
You're welcome. It was great fun. Thanks for having me. That was great fun.